Good evening. My name is Tabitha Watson, and I'm the director and curator here at Homer Watson House and Gallery. Thank you for joining us tonight for the virtual reception of Brenda Reid's community art quilt, From Behind the Mask. Brenda is a master's graduate from University of Waterloo Department of Architecture. Brenda launched this project as part of her degree in October 2020, distributing over 1,500 quilt blocks and spending many hours carefully piecing each block together. This piece has captured stories from so many residents of the region and their experience through this unprecedented time. Tonight, we will be joined by Brenda and several of the community members who created blocks to hear their stories. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Brenda Reid. Thanks for joining us, Brenda. We're looking forward to hearing more about your piece.
Thank you so much, Tabitha. All right, thank you everyone for being here tonight. I am going to begin by sharing some more of the story behind this very large quilt that you see behind. Right, and we can all see the, yes, okay. All right, so the project is entitled From Behind the Mask, a community quilt of COVID-19 stories. Ooh. Are we? Now it's working. Okay, great. All right, here's a shot of the quilt, as you can't see the whole thing behind me. So how did this quilt idea come about? So as Tabitha mentioned, I was doing my Master's of Architecture, and mostly actually through the pandemic. And last summer, there were lots of street signs, yard signs, window art, sidewalk chalk messages of people trying to communicate with each other, trying to support each other. And I was spending quite a bit of time actually walking around and documenting these very temporary expressions to each other. At the same time, in my master's, I was studying care theory, and I sort of got to a point where I was looking at quilts as objects of care, as practices of care, and exploring that. Eventually, I sort of wandered upon these community quilts that dealt with really difficult subject matter. Pictured here is the NAMES Project AIDS quilt, one of the world's largest community art projects, also a community quilt project. Quilts have this amazing ability to tell stories, to connect people, and have traditions all over the world. After launching the project, I actually realized how deeply connected Kitchener-Waterloo region is to quilt making here. So our quilt is a little bit different than a typical quilt. The design for the quilt really reflects the masks that we've all been wearing through the pandemic, the shape, the form, as a sort of symbol of caring for one another. The quilt blocks are all separate from each other, and they are tied together with the quilt ties. So we get these spaces around all the quilt blocks that sort of represent the spaces between us as necessary in the pandemic. The quilt ties then represent what is actually keeping us connected, our social ties, our community ties, and they really form the structure of the quilt and what is holding all of this together. So here's an image of the quilt blocks tied together at a previous window installation. And the quilt block design here is created after making actually some masks myself and pulling out my sewing machine for the first time in a number of years, as probably many people did. For the project, I asked participants to reflect from when the pandemic started back in March 2020 until now, what has changed the most in your life? So participants were people that self-identified as a member of the community of the Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo area. And because of that, I didn't put a limit on you had to be geographically living here. But if you self-identified as a member, that sort of opened the project up to people who may have had to move away or to here because of the pandemic, students that left the city, things like that. In order to sort of make this happen, we, myself and a number of volunteers made these quilt block kits in order to help get materials and some inspiration into people's homes so that they could work on their quilt blocks from the safety of their home. A lot of art projects sort of shifted to kit-based work with the onset of the pandemic, and it was a really perfect form for people to be able to participate in quilt block making from home. We had so many people donate fabric for the quilt to actually make this possible. I started with some quilt material that was left over from a school project, and then, as you can see, a number of people donated bits of pieces of fabric that they had laying around or extra pieces they didn't mind parting with, and that really allowed us to actually provide material to people, which I think was quite successful in helping people sort of start somewhere. We ran a number of virtual workshops. We even did one with Homer Watson here in order to help people sort of think broadly about what quilting could be, how to tell stories through textiles. And as you can see, if you come to visit or if you've seen the blocks online, it's a mixed media project. People used glue, some people sewed, painted, did block printing, a number of different techniques to create their images. So how the project really worked, it sort of had to be very flexible because the pandemic rules changed all the time. We started in October 2020 and the project wrapped up at the end of April 2021. So that is 7 months. Towards the end, it almost exclusively went through the mail. We always had a post office box and I was mailing out kits to people and receiving kits back through the mail. So what would come back were these 2 rectangles of fabric, individual, and people would decorate the front and they could write their name or where they were from or other things on the back. And some of the kids also decided to decorate the back. And once we had these pieces, that's when some awesome and skilled volunteers really helped pull the whole thing together by sewing the quilt blocks together. Here is a picture of actually my sister sewing quilt ties. So that was sort of 2 jobs, sewing these ties and then sewing the blocks together. I spent quite a bit of time during the end of the project adding some hand stitching to yarn or the things that were glued on just for longevity. And so now I'm going to share some of the blocks. We had 568 quilt blocks come back, finished. So behind me, as it does not fit in the screen, is 25 feet of quilt. So 568 quilt blocks. It's 568 stories, points of view, and experiences of the pandemic. And I should mention, some people included their ages on the back of the block. So from that, I can gather that people as young as 2 to 89, let's say plus, participated from all over the area and from further abroad. So here I'm going to share some of the quilt blocks. The first set here is from Julia in Waterloo. Then we have Brendan in Kitchener. On the left is Anonymous. Oh, sorry, I mistaked that one. But this is from NEH in Cambridge. On the left is Agnes from Dunville and Cambridge. During this pandemic, I have not been able to see my stepmom as much as I used to. On the right is Leanne, and I'm going to pronounce the last name wrong, so Leanne C. And it's in loving memory of James E. Dowdy, who passed of COVID-19. On the left here, we have a blog from Alex, who is age 9. Life is like a storm, unpredictable. On the right, this is a blog from Jennifer Kovic in Kitchener, who created boredom buster bins for their neighborhood. On the left here is a blog from Barb Smith called The Circle of Life. Barb lives in Cambridge. Says we had 3 deaths in 2020, an aunt, uncle, and cousin. We were also blessed with a new granddaughter, grandson, and great nephew. The circle of life continues despite COVID. On the right is a blog from Vic Mantha Blythe from Edmonton. I personally know Vic. They were a student at the university who also was displaced because of the pandemic. So it says, living in a house with my partner as I study by distance, feeling far from the School of Architecture in Cambridge, Ontario. On the left, we have a block by Zaya from Waterloo. We all need tests and we all need masks. And on the right is one from Jennifer Chen from Vaughan. Living in so lonely of a time period has enhanced the sense of feeling trapped in a flawed society. It sucks, but I suppose I'm learning something from it. On the left here is a beaded piece by Jen Butler, Kitchener, called Reconnection. And on the right is a block from Nishi in Kitchener. It says, when you reach the end of your rope, tie a knot in it and hang on, from Franklin Roosevelt. And on the block here, it says distract. Here we have a block from Sharon from St. Clements that says hopeful for my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and future generations. And on the right from Ella, age 6, we are in a store with masks, from Stratford. So soon, all of the people who aren't able to visit the quilt in person, we are actually launching a new version of the website, hopefully early fall, which will have every single block that's on the quilt in a sort of view, and you can scroll through them and click on them and read them. So we're making a sort of fully virtual version of the quilt. That was sort of always the goal, but it has taken quite a long time to edit all the photos. Earlier this year, we did 2 window installations prior to the closing of the project. We did one at the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery in Kitchener here, and then one at the Design at Riverside Gallery in Cambridge. And here is the quilt here at the Homer Watson House and Gallery, all together for the first time. And the gallery just reopened this week, so people can now see the quilt for the very first time. This project would absolutely not have been possible at this scale or anything. This project would not have been possible without amazing support of the community. So I'd like to just read out the names of people who donated materials and their time. I'll just read through their first names: Erin, Agnes, and Mariah, Anne, Annie, Anzor, Ariel, Brenda, Brendan, Caitlin, Charlene, Chelsea, Christine, Dave, Diane, Dina, Donna, Ellie, Haran, Arena, Jen, Joyce, Juanita, Linda, Lorraine, Martin, Meredith, Nathaniel, Nicole, Peggy, Sophia, Stephanie, Susan, Tamina, Tessa, Zoya. And a really big thank you to local businesses and organizations that help support the project. most of all including the Homer Watson House and Gallery, the Volunteer Action Center, Stanley Park Community Association, Wellbeing Waterloo Region, the City of Kitchener, the Kitchener Waterloo Art Gallery, the University of Waterloo School of Architecture, the museum, Waterloo Public Library, Idea Exchange, Cafe Pyrus, KW Bookstore, the Adventurers Cafe, and the Brick and Mortar General Store. And a very big thank you to the financial support we've received for this project from the Region of Waterloo Arts Fund and Love My Hood in Kitchener. Thank you all very much, and I'm happy to take comments or questions or anything like that. People would like to share maybe a story about their block if they've also participated.
Yeah, I say it's awesome, and it's great how many people participated, because I think the diversity and even just the piece behind you, there's so many different stories and colors, and it still kind of goes together.
Yeah, I think that's something that I find really special, and that surprised me actually when receiving all the quilt blocks is, I guess I sort of thought eventually people would start to hit on the same notes, but every block is actually so different, and really different ways of representing their stories. And I thought that really spoke to the individualness of people's experience while in a collective pandemic. Thanks, Jen.
Sorry, quote, a message just on the chat from Anne that says it was such a joy to be part of this project, getting to assemble other people's blocks. It's a huge thrill. Getting to bring other people's stories in.
Hi, Brenda. Suzanne here, your cousin. Thanks for the invitation. It was just wonderful to see and hear about this project. And I couldn't help thinking about how, 10, 20, 30 years from now and on, then people sit around and tell stories about how it was during the pandemic in 2020. And they'll be talking about these quilt blocks. And some of these children that made the blocks will be adults and maybe have children of their own. And so the stories go on and on. The stories don't end with the quilt, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's such a good point. I was thinking at one point, even in a few years from now, my brain will sort of package this time in a certain way. And I wrote on the back of my quilt block, I made mine in January, and it says, "Will it end?" So, these stories are coming from such a very specific point. We made them over 7 months, so they sort of touch on different times for different people, but they're sort of people's true feelings, true stories from this time, and really, what do they call that? A first person document or a research item. They're like original, historical documents that were primary source. Thank you, Robin, who's working on a PhD and knows those terms. Yeah, this is, we've packaged some history here that I think we'll only see in time what that sort of gives back to us. Tracy?
Hi, Brenda. It's Tracy. I'm with the City of Kitchener with the Love My Hood, and I had the honor of working with you with the grant application that you put forward. And I just wanted to say congratulations first and foremost to you. I know while it was a community effort that you really took the lead on this, and you had so much going on with your studies and everything else at the same time, that to take this on, and in the midst of a pandemic above all of that. But I really think that, as someone just mentioned, this will live on for years to come, and the storytelling is so important. And I just love that they come from all over, because everybody's experience was unique. While we were all in it together, we each experienced this pandemic in our own unique ways. And I think you've captured it so beautifully. And I think from when I look back to your early proposal of the grant application and thought, wow, this sounds incredible. And you just kept it moving, and the progress. And as the pieces started coming in, it really just reiterated the importance of this project in capturing the stories, and for people to be able to tell their stories. I think it was so important to get a dialogue going during this really challenging time, for people to be able to share their story of what their experience was, whether, you know, whether it was challenging and difficult, or whether they found some glean of hope or something positive in the experience, just in time with family, or slowing down, or the simpler things. So I just wanted to join you this evening in celebration of all your efforts, your hard work, as well as the community that's contributed to this, and all of the volunteers that you had a whole army behind you with this project. And I remember early on when you said, oh, we're going to make little masks and they'll all have ties and we're going to tie it all together. I thought, what an amazing project, but that sounds like a lot of work. And you guys all made it happen. So I really think that's just incredible, and speaks to this. I think it looks amazing displayed there. I can't wait to come out and see it in person. I've tried to look at some of the pieces online and zoom in on the photos and things. So I think it's just so beautiful. And it really was a bright light in my last year of the pandemic, was this project. So thank you to you for initiating it and keeping the momentum going when you did have so many other things on the go as well. But yeah, I just think it's really a spectacular outcome of your idea. So thank you to you and all the people that have contributed.
Well, also thank you very much. And thank you to you, Tracy, who pushed me and helped me write the grant so that we could put this thing on. There was something else I was going to say in there. I think when it started, I had absolutely no idea what I was starting, and didn't know how big it would get or if anybody would participate. So I'm very thankful and quite honored to be even standing here in front of 25 feet of people's stories, and people trusted me with their stories and to put on this whole thing. So that's very special, and it makes me feel really good and like part of this community that I'm actually quite new to. So this has been quite a personal project for me as well, and I think it really helped me get through the winter. I think maybe for quite a lot of people, the winter was quite a hard time, especially with multiple lockdowns here in Ontario. So yeah.
Great. Okay. Not sure if there's anybody else with any other questions or comments. I don't see any hands raised or anything. Is there any final notes that you want to say, Brenda, before I conclude?
I don't know. I can't move the laptop too much because we're plugged into the internet here, but it makes me really happy to see all these pieces. And one of the things that I had hoped would come out of this project was people being able to come and see it and sort of see all of these different experiences that people have been having. And it really, for it to make a space that can foster empathy between individuals in the community, so that you can really start to see how people were affected very differently, and how everybody, even just through their representation, is really quite unique, and that even in non-pandemic times, like everybody has their own life, their own conditions, and that we can sort of build empathy and respect between one another. So for me, that's really what this quilt is about. And it's, you know, a community architecture of sorts. And I'm very happy, very honored, and, you know, very proud to stand here with the quilt.
That's great. So just as we're wrapping up for the evening, I just wanted to say thanks to everyone who's joined us today, and a huge thanks to Brenda for creating the piece in the first place, but also sharing her story about the piece with us this evening. It's really great to learn more about it and all the stories that have gone into it. I know I'd seen a few pictures of some of the blocks in advance, but it's not the same as seeing it in person. And actually, every time I go in the room, I discover a new piece. So if you have a chance, I would definitely encourage you to visit in person and take some time, make sure you leave some time to really appreciate it. So if you are thinking of visiting, From Behind the Mask is currently on show. We are now open. We're open Tuesdays to Sundays from 10 to 4. And the show will be on until August 29th. We also have a virtual counterpart. It's sort of just a little snippet of the show, and it's essentially some of the interpretation panels that are in the space. Obviously, the full website will be up soon as well. But if you're local, I would definitely encourage you to come see it in person while you can. So either or, if you're not comfortable coming in person, there is some virtual components as well. So thanks again to Brenda for sharing and creating with us this evening. And thanks again to everyone who's joined in tonight. It's really great to see community come together, even though we're not in person. So I think we're all used to that by now, but it's always great to see other people in whatever way we can. So I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening, and hopefully we might see you at the gallery soon. Thanks again, and good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. Have a good night.